Some people wear their wealth like a shield, believing it makes them invincible. They think the people wiping their tables and scrubbing their floors are invisible, completely devoid of history or power. But sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has been quietly listening from the shadows. This is a story about a cruel joke that went terribly wrong, a hidden past that refused to stay buried, and a moment of truth that brought a multi-million-dollar empire to its knees. Prepare yourself for a tale where every dirty secret is finally served on a silver platter. Richard Vance was a man who had built his life on perfection. At 55, he owned Laura, one of the most exclusive dining establishments in Manhattan. His suits were tailored in Milan, his shoes were handmade, and his reputation was terrifying. But behind the velvet ropes and the glowing reviews, Richard's life was crumbling. His general manager had just walked out. His young, status-obsessed wife Chloe was a constant source of anxiety, draining his finances and demanding his constant attention. The stress was eating him alive. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Richard started looking for a target. He needed someone to break, someone to humiliate, just to prove he was still the king of his castle. He set his sights on Sarah, the silent, unremarkable dishwasher, who never looked up from the sink. He thought she was just a nobody. He had no idea he was about to poke a sleeping dragon. The heavy rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the restaurant, blurring the neon lights of the Manhattan streets into chaotic streaks of red and gold. Richard Vance stood alone in the empty dining room, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. The deep creases around his mouth seemed to have doubled overnight. He rubbed his temples, feeling the relentless thumping of a migraine taking root. Owning a Michelin-starred empire was supposed to feel like a victory, but lately it felt like a beautifully decorated prison. There was no time to sleep, no time to eat, and certainly no time to enjoy the wealth he had accumulated. He was bleeding staff, his vendors were raising prices, and his patience was completely exhausted. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm the racing of his heart. The silence of the dining room was suddenly shattered by the aggressive, rhythmic buzzing of his phone in his tailored pocket. He didn't even need to look at the screen to know who was calling. It was Chloe, his beautiful, impossible wife, ready to demand answers about why he wasn't home yet. Richard closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable storm. He swiped the screen and brought the phone to his ear, attempting to inject a false warmth into his voice. "Hello, darling. I was just thinking about you." The response on the other end was immediate and icy. A sharp, piercing laugh echoed through the speaker. "It is so nice to know you still remember." "You have a wife, Richard," Chloe snapped. Her voice dripped with a toxic mixture of entitlement and manufactured victimhood. "Are you coming home for dinner? Or am I supposed to eat alone in this massive apartment again?" Richard felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Chloe, you know we had a disaster today. The general manager quit right before service. I have a major contract signing tomorrow morning with the new spice suppliers, and I haven't even read the final draft. I am doing this for us." The line went silent for a moment, followed by a dramatic sigh. "You always have an excuse, Richard. You just do not care." She abruptly ended the call. Richard stared at the black screen, feeling a profound sense of emptiness. He funded her luxury spa days, her endless shopping sprees in Soho, and her trips to Aspen. But in her eyes he was just an ATM that occasionally inconvenienced her. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and walked aggressively toward the kitchen doors. The swinging metal doors pushed open, revealing the glaring fluorescent lights of the prep area. The scent of roasted garlic and searing meats usually calmed him, but tonight it only amplified his irritation. He needed an outlet. He needed to exert dominance. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto Liam, the sharp-tongued, 20-something bartender who always seemed a little too relaxed. Liam was wiping down a cocktail shaker, whistling softly. Richard marched over, his heavy footsteps echoing on the tile floor. "Liam! I have a task for you," Richard barked, his voice carrying over the hum of the refrigerators. "See that woman over there?" He pointed to the back corner, where Sarah, the new dishwasher, was scrubbing a heavy cast-iron pan. She was a ghost of a woman, wearing a terrible frayed blonde wig and an oversized uniform that swallowed her completely. I want her out of my restaurant. Break her, humiliate her, make her quit by the end of the shift. If you pull it off, I will double your tips for the week. If you fail, you are finished here. Liam stopped whistling. He looked from Richard to the hunched figure of the dishwasher. It was a cruel, senseless order, born entirely of a rich man's temper tantrum. But Liam needed this job to pay his tuition. He picked up a crystal highball glass from his tray. It was absolutely flawless, sparkling under the harsh kitchen lights. He walked slowly toward the dish pit, feeling the eyes of the line cooks and waitresses turning toward him. The kitchen grew uncomfortably quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a car crash. The staff loved drama, and they had been whispering about Sarah for weeks. Some said she was a homeless woman Richard had taken pity on. Others claimed she was an ex-convict laying low. She never spoke, never smiled, and never reacted to the chaotic energy of the kitchen. Liam stood right beside her, holding the perfect glass up to the light. He cleared his throat loudly, making sure everyone was watching. "Excuse me, Sarah. We have a serious problem here," Liam said, trying to sound as authoritative and intimidating as possible. Sarah did not stop scrubbing. Her hands, encased in thick, yellow rubber gloves, moved with rhythmic mechanical precision. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes were a striking, piercing shade of steel blue, completely devoid of fear or submissiveness. "What is the problem?" she asked. Her voice was unexpectedly smooth, lacking the rough edge everyone anticipated. Liam pointed a finger at the pristine surface of the glass. "There is a smudge right here. It is filthy. You cannot serve a $50 cocktail in a dirty glass. You need to pay attention, or you will not last another week in this industry." The waitresses standing near the pass exchanged excited, nervous glances. The tension was thick enough to cut with a chef's knife. Everyone waited for the quiet woman to snap, to cry, or to throw the sponge. Instead, Sarah simply reached over, pulled a clean microfiber cloth from the rack, and took the glass from Liam's hand. She wiped the invisible smudge with absolute calm, her expression completely unchanged. "I apologize," she said softly, handing it back. "It will not happen again." Liam stood there, holding the glass, feeling like the biggest fool in Manhattan. He had expected a fight, tears, or at least a defensive argument. Her absolute lack of ego completely neutralized his attack. The kitchen staff, realizing the show was over, awkwardly returned to their stations, murmuring in disappointment. Liam placed the glass back on his tray, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He turned around only to find Richard standing inches away, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. "You call that breaking her?" Richard hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You looked like a pathetic amateur." "You are soft, Liam. You have no killer instinct." Liam sighed, suddenly exhausted by the toxic environment. "Maybe I just do not enjoy torturing people who are just trying to do their jobs, Mr. Vance. If she's doing the work, why do you care so much?" Richard's face turned a violent shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk collar. "I do not pay you to analyze me. You are fired. Pack your things and get out of my sight before I call security." Liam did not argue. He calmly untied his black apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the stainless steel counter. "If you need to project your miserable home life onto your staff, that is your problem, Richard. Good luck running this place into the ground." Liam turned on his heel and walked out the back door, leaving Richard standing in stunned, vibrating silence. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the alleyway slick and smelling of wet asphalt and garbage. Sarah had slipped out a few moments before to take out the trash. She was standing by the large metal dumpsters, breathing in the cold night air. She had removed her apron and the awful blonde wig, revealing a chic, dark bob cut that completely transformed her face. She looked elegant, entirely out of place in the grimy alley. Liam stopped in his tracks, staring at her. She didn't look like a dishwasher anymore. She looked like a woman who was hiding in plain sight. Sarah turned her head, noticing him standing there with his backpack. You got fired, she stated quietly, without a hint of surprise. I did, Liam admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I am really sorry about what happened in there. He forced me to do it. He has been looking for a reason to explode all day. I shouldn't have played his game. I just needed the money. Sarah nodded slowly. I know how this industry works. You do not need to apologize to me. I have dealt with much worse men than Richard Vance. Liam reached into his bag and pulled out a small white pastry box. The pastry chef let me take the leftover bourbon chocolate tart. I was going to eat it alone in my miserable apartment, but considering I just lost my job because of you, well, indirectly because of you, I think you owe me a cup of tea. Sarah looked at the box, then up at Liam's face. For the first time since she started working at the restaurant, a genuine warm smile broke across her face. It completely changed her demeanour. It is a very long subway ride to Brooklyn, she warned him. Liam smiled back. I have nothing but time now. Lead the way. The subway ride was long and loud, the fluorescent lights flickering as the train rattled through the dark tunnels under the East River. They emerged in a neighbourhood in deep Brooklyn that had seen better days. The streetlights were dim, casting long, unsettling shadows across cracked sidewalks. Liam followed Sarah to a crumbling brick apartment building. The front door did not have a working lock, and the hallway smelled faintly of damp wood and old cabbage. Liam felt a sudden wave of guilt. He had judged her, assumed she was just an uneducated worker. Now, seeing the reality of her living situation, he felt terrible. Most of the people living here are elderly, or people who lost everything, Sarah said quietly, as they climbed the creaking wooden stairs. It is government subsidised. Not exactly glamorous, but it is a roof. As they reached the third-floor landing, Liam stepped a bit too close, trying to pass her in the narrow space. In a fraction of a second, Sarah pivoted, grabbed his arm, and shoved him hard against the peeling wallpaper. Her forearm pressed firmly against his throat. It was not a violent strike, but a calculated professional restraint. Liam froze, his eyes wide with shock, his heart hammered against his ribs. He could smell the faint scent of coffee and cloves on her skin. What are you doing? He choked out, raising his hands in surrender. Sarah held him there for a long moment, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of aggression. Satisfied that he was just clumsy, she slowly lowered her arm and stepped back. Her expression returned to calm neutrality. Just making sure you understand boundaries, she said lightly. I may wash dishes for a living, but I am not someone you want to surprise in a dark hallway. Liam massaged his throat, genuinely impressed and slightly terrified. Point taken. I will keep my distance. Sarah unlocked a battered wooden door and pushed it open. Welcome to my palace, she announced. Liam stepped inside and was immediately struck by the contrast. The apartment was tiny, but it was incredibly warm and inviting. There were bright, Moroccan-style rugs on the floor, heavy yellow curtains framing the single window, and a string of warm fairy lights draped across the ceiling. It feels like a different world in here, Liam said, looking around in awe. It is beautiful. Sarah walked into the tiny kitchenette and put a battered kettle on the ancient gas stove. Go sit by the window. I do not have a dining table, but the windowsill works just fine. She disappeared into the bathroom to change out of her damp clothes. Liam set the pastry box on the windowsill and wandered over to the humming refrigerator. It was covered in cheap souvenir magnets. Right in the centre was a photograph that immediately caught his attention. It showed a beautiful little girl, maybe 5 years old, with dark curls and bright blue eyes, standing against a white stone wall overlooking a brilliant blue ocean. Beside her was a handsome young man with a bright, infectious smile. He was wearing an expensive linen shirt and a very recognisable, high-end luxury watch. They looked ecstatically happy. Liam stared at the photo, completely absorbed. Who are they? He whispered to himself. He heard a soft rustling and turned around. Sarah was standing there, dressed in a simple, elegant silk slip dress. Without the heavy uniform, she looked breathtaking. She caught him looking at the photograph. She walked over slowly, her eyes fixed on the image of the young man. That is my daughter. Lily, Sarah said softly, and that is David, her father. Liam felt a pang in his chest. Are you two still together? He asked gently, already guessing the answer from the heavy sorrow in her voice. No, Sarah replied, looking down at her hands. He passed away. A long time ago. Liam immediately regretted his curiosity. I am so sorry. I shouldn't have asked. Sarah shook her head, offering a sad smile. It is okay. It is a part of my story. Come, let us eat this tart before it goes bad. They sat on the floor by the window, eating the rich chocolate pastry on paper plates. Liam watched her. She held her plastic fork with the grace of someone accustomed to fine silver. Her posture was absolutely perfect, her back straight, her shoulders relaxed. You are not a dishwasher, Liam stated suddenly. I mean, you are, but that is not who you really are. The way you hold yourself, the way you handled that situation tonight. You have been wealthy. You have been in charge. Who are you hiding from? Sarah stopped eating. She looked out the window into the dark, rainy night. For a long time, the only sound was the distant wail of a police siren. Finally, she sighed. I come from a very old, very wealthy family in Boston. Politicians, lawyers, diplomats. They had my entire life planned out before I was born. Boarding schools, Ivy League universities, a strategic marriage. But I hated every second of it. I only wanted one thing. I wanted to dance. I wanted to be on stage. Liam leaned forward, captivated. So, you ran away? Sarah nodded. On my 18th birthday, I packed a single bag and bought a bus ticket to New York. I got into Juilliard. My parents cut me off completely. They said I would come crawling back within a month. But I didn't. I worked night shifts in diners, scrubbed floors, did whatever it took. And then I met David. He was a choreographer. Brilliant, wild, and incredibly kind. We fell in love instantly. We travelled the world dancing. We went to Morocco for a festival, and it changed our lives. We fell in love with the culture, the food, the spices. We were going to conquer the world. But the universe has a funny way of destroying your plans, Sarah continued, her voice growing hollow. During a performance in Marrakesh, the stage collapsed. The scaffolding was rotten. David fell 20 feet. He shattered his spine. The doctors said he would never walk properly again, let alone dance. It broke his heart, but we refused to give up. We took all our savings, every penny we had, and we opened a Moroccan fusion restaurant right here in the city. We poured our souls into it. We imported authentic spices, hired the best cooks. It was a massive success. Within 2 years, we were the hottest reservation in town. Lily was born. We were finally happy again. Liam stopped breathing. He could see the tears pooling in her eyes. What went wrong? He whispered. Sarah's jaw tightened. We needed a new supplier for our spices. We met these guys. They seemed legitimate. Nice suits, great paperwork. They offered us a massive shipment of saffron and cumin at a great price. We signed the contract. A week later, customs raided our warehouse. The spice bags were lined with industrial-grade narcotics. We had been set up, Sarah said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. The cartel used our legitimate business as a front to move millions of dollars of drugs into the country. Before we could even contact our lawyers, David went to meet one of the suppliers to demand answers. They found his body in the river the next morning. The police called it a heart attack. I knew the truth. They murdered him. They froze all our assets. The restaurant was seized by the federal government, and the cartel started sending people to watch my apartment. I grabbed Lily, packed a bag, and ran. I have been hiding ever since. I wear the wig, I wear the awful clothes, and I keep my head down. It is the only way to keep my daughter safe. Liam was completely paralysed. The story was so horrific, so massive he could barely process it. He looked at this brave, beautiful woman sitting on the floor of a rundown apartment, and he felt a profound wave of respect. You are the strongest person I have ever met, he said quietly. Sarah wiped a single tear from her cheek. I survive. That is all I do, but I promise you one day I will make them pay. While Sarah was sharing her tragic history in Brooklyn, Richard Vance was experiencing his own private nightmare in a luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park. He walked through the front doors, exhausted and desperate for silence, only to hear the sharp sound of shattering glass from the living room. He rushed in. The floor was covered in the glittering remnants of a $10,000 crystal vase. Chloe was standing in the center of the room, her designer silk robe falling off one shoulder, her face streaked with mascara. She looked like a wild, deranged animal. "Where have you been?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I have been sitting here all night. You promised to take me to the gala." Richard stepped carefully over the broken glass. "Chloe, please stop acting like a lunatic. I told you I had a crisis at the restaurant. I'm trying to keep our business afloat so you can keep buying useless garbage, like the vase you just destroyed." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You do not love me. You are probably sleeping with one of those pathetic waitresses. I am a prisoner in this golden cage." Richard felt a dangerous heat rising in his chest. He wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her that her golden cage was built entirely on his blood, sweat, and stress. Instead, he simply turned his back on her and walked into the master bedroom. He locked the door behind him, collapsing onto the massive king-size bed. He just needed to sleep. But as he pressed his face into the pillows, a wave of nausea hit him. The bed linens absolutely reeked of jasmine and lilies. It was Midnight Bloom, Chloe's signature perfume. He hated the smell. It gave him terrible migraines. He had specifically forbidden her from wearing it in the bedroom. He sat up, his mind racing. Why was the smell so incredibly strong on his side of the bed? He looked at the nightstand. There was a faint, circular water ring on the polished wood. A glass had been placed there recently. Someone else had been in his bed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Chloe wasn't just throwing tantrums, she was cheating on him. The sheer audacity of it made his blood boil. He lay back down in the dark, his exhaustion replaced by a cold, calculating fury. The next morning, Richard arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early. The dining room was silent, the tables perfectly set for lunch service. He sat at the bar, nursing a black coffee, his mind formulating a plan. He was going to catch Chloe, and he was going to destroy whoever had the nerve to sleep in his bed. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Chloe strutted in, wearing a trench coat and oversized sunglasses. Trailing behind her was a man Richard had never seen before. He was tall, heavily muscled, and wore a cheap leather jacket. He looked like a thug, completely out of place in a fine dining establishment. "Richard, darling," Chloe called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I know you were stressed about losing your prep cook, so I brought you a solution. This is Marcus. He is a brilliant cook, and he needs a job. I thought I would help you out." Richard slowly lowered his coffee cup. He stared at Marcus. The man did not look away. His gaze was flat and deeply arrogant. Richard stood up and walked closer. As he approached, the scent hit him. It was faint, but unmistakable. Jasmine and lilies. The man smelled exactly like Chloe's perfume. Richard felt a twisted smile spread across his face. So this was the lover. A cheap thug she was trying to sneak into his kitchen. The audacity was almost impressive. "Marcus, is it?" Richard asked smoothly. "Do you have experience with high-end cuisine?" Marcus smirked. "I can handle a knife. That is all you need to know." Richard nodded slowly. "Perfect. Go to the kitchen. Put on an apron. You start right now." Marcus gave Chloe a triumphant look and walked toward the back. Chloe beamed, clapping her hands together. "See? I am a supportive wife. I solve problems. Now, about today. I know you have that big meeting with the new spice vendors. I want to be there. I want to be involved in the business." Richard stared at her, trying to read the game she was playing. Why the sudden interest in the supply chain? But before he could refuse, Chloe stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Actually, I have a better idea. A little prank to relieve your stress. Why don't you bring that miserable, ugly dishwasher to the meeting? Tell the vendors she is your wife. It will be hilarious to watch them try to respect her. It will be a fantastic joke. Richard studied his wife's face. The cruelty in her eyes was genuine. She wanted to humiliate Sarah just for entertainment. But as Richard thought about it, a different plan began to form. He wanted to make Chloe look foolish. He wanted to create chaos. Fine, Richard agreed coldly. If it will make you happy, I will bring the dishwasher to the meeting. You can sit in the adjacent room and watch the disaster unfold. Chloe giggled like a wicked child and hurried off to find a hiding spot. Richard walked into the kitchen. Sarah was already there, scrubbing the morning prep pots. She looked exactly as she always did, invisible and silent. "Sarah," Richard called out, stopping near the sinks. "Leave the dishes. I need you in the private dining room in 10 minutes. I have an important contract signing. You are going to sit next to me, and you are going to pretend to be my wife. Don't speak. Just nod and look stupid." Sarah slowly turned the water off. She pulled off her rubber gloves. Her steel blue eyes locked onto his. "Pretend to be your wife?" she asked quietly. "Just do it," Richard snapped. "It is an order." Sarah nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Vance." 10 minutes later, Richard was seated at the long mahogany table in the private dining room. Across from him sat two men in sharp, expensive suits. They introduced themselves as representatives of Golden Crescent Imports. The lead negotiator, a man with slicked back hair named Victor, was talking incredibly fast, pushing a thick contract across the table. "Mr. Vance, this is a phenomenal deal. The highest quality saffron, cumin, and cardamom directly from our farms. Just sign on the dotted line, and the first shipment arrives tomorrow." The door clicked open. Sarah walked in. She had not changed her clothes. She was still wearing the baggy grey uniform, her hair tucked under a net, her face devoid of makeup. She walked slowly to the chair next to Richard and sat down, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Gentlemen," Richard said, suppressing a smirk, "allow me to introduce my lovely wife, Sarah. She likes to help out in the kitchen to stay grounded. She will be joining us for the signing." Victor and his partner stared at Sarah, completely bewildered. They exchanged a nervous glance, unsure of how to navigate the bizarre situation. "Well," Victor stammered, recovering his fake smile, "it is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Vance. As I was saying to your husband, this contract guarantees the finest spices." Sarah reached across the table. Her movement was incredibly fluid and fast. She pulled the thick stack of papers toward her. "May I see that?" she asked. Her voice had changed. The submissive murmur was gone, replaced by a sharp, authoritative tone of a CEO. She began flipping through the pages, her eyes scanning the complex legal jargon with terrifying speed. Richard watched her, his amusement fading into deep confusion. Sarah stopped on page 4. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against a specific paragraph. "Golden Crescent Imports," she read aloud. "Registered under a parent shell company located in the Cayman Islands, a subsidiary of a logistics firm that was investigated federally 3 years ago for maritime smuggling." She looked up slowly, her eyes locking onto Victor. "You are not spice merchants. You are running a transit hub for industrial narcotics. You use the heavy scent of cumin and saffron to mask the smell from the canine units at the border." The room plunged into absolute silence. The air grew instantly cold. Victor's fake smile vanished completely. His partner slowly reached a hand inside his suit jacket. Richard's heart stopped. He suddenly realized he was not in a business meeting. He was sitting with a cartel. "How do you know that?" Victor hissed, his voice dropping an octave. Sarah leaned forward, her presence suddenly filling the massive room. She looked dangerous. "Because 3 years ago, your organization used the exact same contract, word for word, to destroy a restaurant called the Moroccan Sun. You used that contract to smuggle drugs into my kitchen, and when my partner figured it out, you murdered him." Victor's eyes went wide. He recognized the story. He recognized her. "You are the dancer," he breathed. "You were supposed to be dead." Sarah smiled, a cold, terrifying expression. "I died a long time ago, but today I woke up." She pulled a small black device from her pocket and set it on the table. It was a digital recorder. The federal agents have been listening to this room for the last 20 minutes. The building is surrounded. The doors are locked. Chaos erupted instantly. Victor jumped up, kicking his chair back. His partner pulled a gun, but before he could raise it, the heavy double doors of the private dining room were kicked open. A dozen heavily armed SWAT officers flooded the room, their weapons raised. "Drop it! Get on the ground!" the lead officer screamed. Victor and his partner were thrown against the mahogany table, handcuffs clicking around their wrists. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his mind entirely blank, paralysed by the violence and the shocking revelation. Sarah calmly stood up, walked around the struggling men, and opened the side door to the adjacent room. Chloe was standing there, pale as a ghost, trembling uncontrollably. Next to her was Marcus, the new prep cook. "You," Sarah said, pointing directly at Marcus. "Take him too. He is their inside man." He was brought in to coordinate the drops from the kitchen. The officers grabbed Marcus. Chloe began to scream hysterically as they slapped cuffs on her lover. Richard finally found his voice. "Chloe," he whispered. "You were helping them?" Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees. "He promised me millions, Richard. He said we would take your money and run. I'm sorry." Richard watched as the police dragged his crying, treacherous wife and the cartel members out of his restaurant. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dining room, casting long, strange shadows. The restaurant was saved, but his entire life felt completely hollowed out. He looked for Sarah, but she was gone. She had vanished into the chaos. That evening, Richard Vance stood on a dimly lit street in Brooklyn. The rain had started again, soaking the shoulders of his expensive overcoat. He stared up at the peeling brick facade of Sarah's apartment building. He took a deep breath and walked up the creaking stairs. He knocked on the wooden door. It opened a moment later. Sarah stood there, wearing a soft sweater, looking peaceful for the first time. Behind her, standing in the small kitchen, was Liam. Richard swallowed hard. He felt a profound sense of humility, an emotion he had not experienced in decades. "Sarah, I came to apologize. I treated you like garbage. I used you for a sick joke. And in return, you saved my life. You saved my business. I owe you everything." He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and held it out to her. "What is this?" Sarah asked, not taking the envelope. "It is the deed to a luxury condominium in Manhattan," Richard said softly. "Fully paid for. It is safe. It has security for you and your daughter. And tomorrow, my lawyers are drafting paperwork to give you a 40% equity stake in Laura. I want you to run the restaurant, Sarah. I need a real leader. I need you." Sarah looked at the envelope, then up at Richard. Her eyes softened. She took the envelope gently. "Thank you, Richard. I accept. But there is someone else you need to talk to." She stepped aside, allowing Richard to see Liam fully. Liam crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "You fired me, remember?" Liam said coldly. Richard stepped into the small apartment. He looked at the young man, really looked at him. The shape of his jaw, the dark hair, the defiant spark in his eyes. "Liam!" Richard's voice cracked. "When I saw your resume, I recognized your mother's name, Julia. She was a culinary student 30 years ago. I loved her, but I was arrogant. I wanted fame, and I left her when she got pregnant. I ran away like a coward. I am your father, Liam. I am so deeply sorry." The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy with decades of unspoken pain. But in that tiny Brooklyn apartment, the healing finally began. A year later, the world had changed. Richard had stepped down from the daily operations, marrying his first love, Julia, in a quiet, beautiful ceremony by the sea. He was finally a father. The restaurant, now under Sarah's brilliant leadership, had won another Michelin star. And as for Liam, he had found his place, not just in the family, but by Sarah's side. They built a new life together, proving that the deepest scars can sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story of resilience and redemption. If this tale moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more cinematic stories, and leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered a shocking secret about someone you thought you knew? Tell us your story.